Good afternoon, everyone. Big welcome to today's guest lecture on 5 critical skills required for a successful career in digital marketing with international marketing speaker and trainer, Mr. Michael Leander. We're really thrilled to have him with us all the way from Denmark. So without further ado, on to you, Michael, and your lovely presentation.
Thanks so much for that wonderful introduction, and hello to you listening here. It's true, I am in Denmark right now, and I must apologize because I thought that some of my family members would be home to help with the dog. So if you hear a dog barking in the background, don't worry, it might stress me a little bit, but it was inevitable. So I'm very happy that you're here, and I also want to start off by congratulating you on making a very serious and a very good choice to join the upGrad education. I think it's a wonderful program, and I hope you've learned a lot, and more importantly, I hope you will gradually start applying what you've learned throughout the program. Now and for the next around 25 minutes is I'm going to give you some of the 5 skills that I believe are essential to become a great digital marketer and also to build a great career or to further your existing career. And at the end of that, there will be a Q&A session where I'm very, very happy to take all of your questions. So let me just get my PowerPoint shared with you. Just one second. Right. So you've probably seen some of my content on upgrad.com, but perhaps I should just summarize my career. I started in sales and marketing and been involved with digital marketing since around 1995. So obviously, I've learned a lot in that period of time. I've worked as a CEO or CMO in companies. I've worked as a consultant for large global brands, and I've used digital marketing and other marketing skills to get some level of success with my own businesses. So really what I speak about at any given time are only things that I really, really, truly know about. So let's start here. Because what I've learned over 20 plus years of doing this is that a lot of people forget in their daily routines what it's actually all about. What's the purpose of what they're doing? And I think it's important to always remember that the purpose of a business is to create a customer who creates customers, right? We tend to forget that. And if you're in a large corporation, even more so, because then there's all the politics and fighting for budgets and whatnot. But in reality, I've learned that people who always focus on making customers so happy that they will eventually reference or recommend a business to others usually are more successful. And when it comes to marketing, specifically, I believe the purpose of marketing is to acquire, convert, retain, and grow customers. Now, think about this for a moment, because acquire, convert, retain, and grow, that would be 4 different focus areas. Don't you agree? That's right. But think about this. A lot of people who are not, excuse me, who are not very successful, they see this as just one big pot. Now, successful marketers, they're going to be aware of when they're doing what, and they'll be aware that different activities fit different purposes. So acquisition activities are usually going to be different, and the mix of those activities are going to be different than, for example, retention activities. And the same goes, retention is many different things, but also growing customers requires certain different activities in order to be successful with that. But I think the last part, the one in red, whom then in turn will attract other customers through referral. That's a wonderful thing if you're able to do that. And in terms of digital marketing, as you probably know, it's a heck of a lot easier to activate your existing customer base with the purpose of getting them to recommend you to others. And as you know, in social media, this is happening all the time with pluses and minuses. What I mean by that is that there are people who will dish your product or your service, and that is detracting people perhaps from doing business with you, and vice versa. So point of this slide really is just to remind you that marketing is not just one thing with one purpose. There are multiple specific purposes within that, and you have to sort of orchestrate your marketing activities around each of those 4 that I just mentioned. Now, I thought perhaps, I don't know about you, but I like to connect with people, and I'd like to know who you are, because frankly, I don't. I think you're in India, I'm in Denmark, but that's as far as I know. So I have a Twitter handle that is at Michael Leander. If you want to follow me, I'll follow you back. And if you're not already following upGrad _ edu, you might want to do that as well. And if you want to tweet, you can tweet questions at me and upGrad, or you can comment, or whatever you want, share some resource. Please use the hashtag Michael Leander. If you want to connect with me on Instagram, you see the link there, and it's just search Google for Michael Leander, and I think you'll find my Facebook and LinkedIn and all of these other channels. And finally, see the link below there. We will have a webinar on the 7th of March, which is pretty much open to everyone. So if you want to share that in your social media channels, that would just be absolutely awesome. So let's get into the content. Now, I like to tell this story about Shahrazad, because I think the story really is very relevant to marketers. You may remember the story. Shahrazad was in this harem in some Arabian country many years ago, where the local caliph every night would invite a new concubine to his bedroom. And the following morning, he would have them beheaded, in other words, killed. But one day, Shahrazad came to his bedroom. She was a concubine, and she started telling a story. And this story was so intriguing that it got the Caliph's attention. But not only did it get his attention, she managed to retain his attention. So came next morning, where Shahrazad thought it was time for her to die. Surprisingly, the Caliph said, no, I want you to come back this evening. And now you may remember the story from 1001 Arabian Nights, because she did come back for at least 1001 nights and continued to tell this story. So what can we learn from that? I think, first of all, when we engage with customers, we have to understand that essentially we are selling ourselves and our story. And when we do that, we need a strong beginning, but we also need to be able to keep it interesting over time. And that's why it says build to last. It's not enough to work in isolation, as most brands do. You see it all the time, especially with big brands. They run one campaign one quarter and a different campaign another quarter, and they don't necessarily connect from one to the other. What you want to do is make sure that you got your story right, that you have that longevity planned into it. So your story may start in January, connecting with customers. It may not end until 5 or 10 years later. And in this day and age, I would have to say that a story has to be worthy of share and recommendation. And I don't just mean sharing on social media. Obviously, if your story is so strong that people will share it on a, so to speak, belly-to-belly basis with their contacts and friends and colleagues and people around, then that's obviously very, very strong. And as you know, many brands have enjoyed this type of word of mouth and established a strong position through that. People usually mention Apple, but there are many other brands that have acquired that type of positioning through what we just talked about, which is delivering a strong product, have a strong story around the product, and have that longevity of that particular story. And consistency in what they deliver is also important. Harley-Davidson is another very good example of that. So to become a great marketer, or I would say even just to become a great business person, you have to focus on the end goal. And if you think about your daily routines in your job, if you're currently working in marketing, I think just think for a few seconds about what's actually going on. I think you'll find that a lot of the activities that your colleague do, and maybe even the ones that you do, don't really focus on the end goal. They focus on other steps towards the end goal. And what I've learned over the years is that a lot of people kind of forget the end goal. Let's say the end goal is sales. And you look at the social media people, you look at the PR people, you look at many other different types of people, they don't talk a lot about sales within a marketing environment. Obviously in sales they do, but not in marketing. And I think that's a problem. And I think one shortcut to become better at digital marketing is to always have that end goal in mind. Always ask yourself, whatever activity it is, ask yourself, will this support our end goal? Is this a better solution for us to achieve what we ultimately want to achieve, whether that's a sale, acquiring a lead, selling once again to an existing customer? But I make it sound easy, and I know it's not. Because in marketing, if we want to increase revenue, if we want to get sales, there's so many things involved. And I think this is a good lead-in to talk about the 5 skills. Just look at this slide. There are just a few overall areas that most marketers are involved with on a weekly or a monthly basis. Some of these are strategic, like differentiation that you see at the lower left corner. If you're being honest, you don't talk a whole lot about differentiation, do you? You may talk about competition a lot, but you don't talk a lot about positioning and differentiation, for example. You may not talk a whole lot about how do we build deeper customer relationships. And I'm deliberately mentioning this because I think that most great marketers that I've met, whether digital or otherwise, they're the ones that really focus on the customer. Focus on understanding the customer's needs, focus on how they create an emotional connect with customers, or with different fragments or segments, if you will, of customers. And in my opinion, to become a great marketer, you really need to be able to take an interest in the people you're trying to serve and really, really understand, and not just say that you're customer-centric or customer-orientated or focused, but really believe inside that you need to understand what that other person is about. Because when you do, you'll be much better at communicating to them or with them. So that said, this sort of follows, which is the focus for a great digital marketer is to focus on the customer experience. And the customer experience is not just something that relates to product or the actual service around the product or the brand DNA. It very much relates to communication. In fact, think about this. If somebody sees your message for the first time, you're kind of creating some anticipation, right? You're promising stuff that you later have to deliver in order to be able to deliver a great customer experience. Because if you overpromise, which is very common still in, I'm sorry to say, in India, there's a lot of overpromising going on all the time. Maybe it's because it's such a big country, I don't know. But that backfires, as you well know, because if people are not happy, if they're disappointed, they're going to go to social media and start dissing your brand, right? So a great digital marketer will focus on that customer experience. And that means understanding at least 4 main points. One, of course, is we live in an omnichannel environment. I'll get back to that in a moment. Relevance really is not a buzzword. It's key. Relevance also means context, content and context. For example, you know that in the past 5 years, people have been screaming about the importance of content, and content is king and queen and emperor and I don't know what. But the reality is content means nothing if it's not in context. When it's in context, you increase relevance. Empowerment, what does that mean? That means empower the customer to do what the customer wants to do, wherever and whenever the customer wants to do that. Think about your own website. Think about your e-commerce portal. Think about your blogs, your social media presence. Are you empowering your customers to do what they want to do? Or do you even know what your customers might want to do? Or are you one of those inside out type of marketers who really care mostly about what the brand wants, what your company wants, what your products wants to do? Or you're one of the smart digital marketers who are skilled enough to understand that outside in, understanding the market, what they really want, and then delivering that. Well, you ask yourself that question. And finally, innovation. And I think innovation has become so much more important over the past 10 years, and I think it will become increasingly important. And I think, in fact, it will become a necessity. So what that means for you as a marketing person, of course, is that you have to start sort of reinventing how you spend your time in the workplace. Because in my opinion, you can't innovate as a result of brainstorms. You can't innovate as a result of an innovation process once in a while. Innovation is something that happens as a result of a continued focus on how can we improve, how can we make things better, how can we reinvent ourselves under certain circumstances. So it requires time and a dedicated effort over long periods of time. And so that's something you probably want to think about. How do you build that in to your daily routines in order to cover that part as well? And just want to cover this one really, really quickly, just to mention a few points. A great digital marketer is not going to be ignorant to this slide. A great digital marketer is going to go to the first step there and say, okay, mobile is first screen. What does that mean for me? It's not just a trend. It's not something waving out here that doesn't involve you and your brand. It involves everybody. And in particular in India, because a large proportion of internet users in India actually come online for the first time through a smartphone or a tablet or any of those hybrid devices that you see a lot all over India. I mean, they're bigger than a smartphone, smaller than a tablet. And then the second one, ask yourself, how does that relate to what I do and what my business is about? Devices connecting everything. That, of course, talks about wearable and all kinds of things. I'm not going to go through all of these points. My point of this is when you see these trends and they're documented and they're really happening, as a digital marketer, you need to stop up and ask yourself, is this an opportunity for me that I can somehow leverage to improve my business? Is this a threat that I have to address, or can I ignore that for a couple of years, etc., etc.? So point is, you gotta have your ears out, what do you call them in English? Like unfold your ears and really listen to what's going on in your market and be ready to act whenever you see something that's potentially a threat or a opportunity for your business. I know marketers, I can't mention any names, but they're just ignorant to these types of things. And that doesn't create a great career, and it doesn't create better results than competition if you're not really paying attention to these types of things. So let's look at my 5 critical skills. Obviously, there are more, but I've tried to prioritize and say, what are in my opinion, what I've learned over 20 plus years in digital marketing and more years in marketing as a whole. The first thing, I'll go through 2 of them in more detail, and the last 3 you'll get at that webinar I mentioned before. The first is to be channel agnostic. The second one is to be ROMI focused. ROMI stands for Return on Marketing Investment. The third is to be experimental. The fourth is to focus on the right approach. And the fifth is, and I don't say this just because we had an upGrad event, study and apply what you learn. Don't read books, don't go to webinars, don't take courses, go to seminars and workshops to get knowledge if you don't use it. It has to be practical and actionable for you. So let's dive into the first one, be channel and media agnostic. And let me just say something before I dive into this. So I've been fortunate enough to spend a lot of time in India. A lot. And I have spoken at many conferences. I've done many master classes. I have also helped as an interim person a large digital agency for a number of years. So I have a pretty good understanding of what's going on in India, even if I'm not Indian. And what I learned is that in India, a lot of people do many places in the world, which is once they're comfortable with a given channel, a given platform, then they kind of think that they can solve all problems in that channel. Let me mention Facebook as an example. A lot of social media marketers really honestly believe deep in their heart that they can solve all business problems by having that Facebook presence or investing in that Facebook presence. You're a smart person because otherwise you wouldn't be here. So I know you know that this is true, but I also think that you're not one of those people. You're not one of those guys who's going to become an evangelist for a certain channel or for a certain method. I think you're one of the ones who wants a great career, and you know that that sort of implies that you are channel and media agnostic. So let me dive a little further into this. What I mean by being agnostic pretty much is that you don't have preferences for any type of media, any type of channel. Every time you have a certain objective, you're going to look at that objective in a certain way. You're going to follow a certain process, and then eventually you're going to understand where do you need to place your messages, where do you need to be with your proposition in order to catch, if you will, customers' attention and get the response you want. This is really important. And let me continue a little bit down this path. What we know is that what we used to call integrated campaigns, they're still integrated campaigns, but we give things a new name every once in a while because we're in marketing. So what I like to refer to as multi-channel, some people refer to it as omnichannel nowadays. When you integrate across multiple channels, you typically improve the performance of your campaigns if you do it in the right way. And there are studies that shows that multi-channel marketers multiply return on marketing investment by a factor of 5, 10, 15, and so on. Now, if you think about this, you know that it involves more work because you have to adjust the messaging, the creative, maybe the call to actions according to each channel, because a mobile channel works obviously differently than an outdoor channel or a banner ad on a website and so on. So this is a very important point if you want to become successful. I think in India as well, you become successful by delivering results. Isn't that what it's like? I think so. So there's some considerations when you think about this. The first thing and the most important thing is, where are your customers and what do they use each channel for? Pardon my spelling mistake there. Really important to understand where your customers are. Where do they spend their time? And more importantly, what do they do there? So if they're on Facebook, what is it exactly that they do when they're on Facebook? Are they there to watch your advertisements? Are they there to engage with your brand presence? Are they there to engage with family and friends and contacts? What you have to remember when you think about this is what we call me time. So for example, we know this is a global study. We know that 46% of the time that people spend on mobile devices is me time. And that is literally me. It's about me. It's about my entertainment. It's about my interest and so on. But I think you know, and this goes for India as well, a lot of that time really is entertainment time, right? And perhaps in large cities like Mumbai and Delhi and Bangalore and Hyderabad and so on, I think there might be more me time than, for example, in Denmark, simply because the commute time very often is much longer in these very large cities. So think about that, and this is really important. So when you ask yourself where you need to be, you also need to understand why. Not just because, but you have to have an answer to that. Why do we need to be on Facebook? Why do we need to advertise there? Why do we need to have a great presence in another place? And then the other question is, can each of these channels individually or in combination provide the return on marketing investment that you require? And the reality is, a lot of channels can provide results, but not a very good return on marketing investment. So I'll get into that a little bit when we talk about attribution in a moment, but this is also really, really important. And which channels are merely serving as support to other channels, right? So Twitter, for example, in many countries really is just a support channel, because in many countries there's no critical mass on Twitter, which means essentially there are no results, but still there are some, let's call it super fans of Twitter, who are on Twitter all day long, and so many brands feel they need to be there for that reason. And I can talk for myself. You go to my Twitter channel, I'll be completely ruthlessly honest about this. I have some followers, but I never see any traction. I'm lucky if somebody once a week clicks on a link, right? But of course, you get all the mentions and so on. The question is there a value? Maybe for me, because I'm a speaker and all of that, maybe there is some value, but I'm actually not sure if I was a brand selling concrete stuff, that I would even put a lot of money into Twitter. So finally, how do you measure that? And you know, speaking about Twitter, I think you know it's obvious that you want to track whatever is going on, but it has multiple sides, right? We'll get back to that in a moment. But I just want to say for now, remember that measurement and return on marketing investment is kind of multi-dimensional. What I mean by that is you have the hardcore numbers, which is your metrics like, what does it cost me to get a lead? What does it cost me to get a sale? What does it cost me to repeat sale? But in this day and age, you have little things like reputation as well. And many channels sort of aids to maintain or improve your reputation. And that's kind of the soft metrics that I think you also need to build into the equation. But as you probably know, it's very difficult to put monetary value of that. What is the value of increasing reputation by 5%? I mean, I have no idea how to calculate that, because I don't know how much that aids our opportunity to sell more product. So these are some of the most important considerations. And if you do these considerations every time you have an activity, I'm sure you're going to be more successful. So the second thing, as I mentioned before, is to be return on marketing investment focused. I'd like to believe if I've had any success in my career, it's because I always focused on, I didn't know it was called return on marketing investment back then, but I always focused on the return, always. Lots of marketers don't do that. Lots of marketers get caught up in, couldn't it be fun to do this? And wouldn't I look great if we did this TV commercial? And so on and so forth. And that's a little bit dangerous. It's a lot more fun to work like that. But in terms of career, in terms of all of those things that follow with being successful, it's a much safer bet to take on that religion, if you will, of always being return on marketing investment focused. So let's talk a little bit about that. The first thing you need to do, obviously, is to understand your key metrics. And what I've learned also in India, talking to large businesses, is that a lot of businesses, they don't really have their most important metrics defined. And very often the metrics they have defined are probably not the right ones to focus on. Here's what I think is most important for almost all industries. First of all, what does it cost us to acquire a new customer? Ask yourself if you even know that in your current business, or if somebody else knows how much you can afford, if you will, to pay for acquiring a new customer. What is the cost of acquiring a sale if you're very transactional? What is the cost of acquiring a qualified lead? And mind you, I said qualified. Now, in my businesses, we get somewhere between 200 and 400 leads every single week. But I could also tell you, if we wanted to sell certain consulting stuff to them, probably only 2% are qualified, right? So what you need to do is understand what is a qualified lead and how much can you afford to pay to get a qualified lead. And obviously, when you define that, you also need to understand which other activities do you need to do to convert from that qualified lead status to the first time that lead transacts with you and becomes what I call a trial customer, but let's just for the simplicity call it a customer. And then finally, what is the overall cost of retaining, not growing, but just retaining your customer base? We're not going to talk about marketing automation and customer lifecycle management right now, but obviously that's what I'm referring to when I talk about cost of retaining your customer base. So with this comes the ability to measure attribution, and it's really, really difficult. What I like to do is keep this simple. So great marketers, they would use a matrix like this, where you're on the left side, you have the channel like email marketing, online advertising, etc. Then you have % of your advertising or marketing spend, and then you just rate the efficiency of each of these channels in terms of a specific purpose. Let's say sales, right? Now, you can actually do this after this call if you want to, just for fun. Just see what you think. When we do this exercise with larger corporations, it almost always turns out that people think that certain channels are more efficient than others. But when we dive into the numbers, it turns out to be reverse. And that has to do with the emotional part of going to work, right? There's simply certain things we like to do better than others. Let's say social media may be more fun than doing email marketing, right? And it's quite interesting how we allow our emotions to sort of prioritize what we do. And many people will argue, they're the evangelists that I mentioned before, that we should be doing more of this instead of more of that. And they argue simply because they think the former is more fun to do, right? So that's one thing you can do. And also beware, can each of these stand alone, or do they work better if they're part of an integrated setup? When you, oops, sorry about that. When you do this exercise, there are two other things that you actually might want to consider as well. And if you look at the yellow color to the right, do you see the one that says % of customers who prefer this channel? That's actually very important. Remember what I said before, and you want to be where your customers are, and you want to understand what the customers do in that channel. And that's why I'm mentioning this here. It's no good to use email marketing if very small percentage of your customers are actually using that channel, right? And the same with all other channels. If people don't like that you call them up, or that you spam SMS them and it's not working, then you want to take that into consideration as well. But also understand this. What is a channel good for? Because there certainly are some channels that are very good at getting attention, awareness. And there are other channels that are very good at selling. There are other channels that are very good at just educating your audience. You want to understand those things as well. And when we talk about return on marketing investment, in terms of overall measurement, I'd just like to give you a few ideas. And by the way, very skilled digital marketers, they'll come up with concepts like this. So traditionally, we've been measuring share of wallet. That concept, that what that means is that let's take upGrad as an example, and let's say I'm a student and I have $10,000 per year to spend for my education, and at the moment I'm spending $2,000 of those $10,000 with upGrad. That means upGrad's share of my wallet right now is 20%. Now, if they know that I have $10,000 to spend, they also know they can get 80% more, the 80% that I'm currently spending with competition. Now, that's how we have traditionally measured these things. But I think today there's something really, really exciting. I think we should look at measuring share of heart and incorporate that in our return on marketing investment. Here's why. If you have a large share of my heart, that really means that I have preference for you. If I'm going to buy a car, I'm going to buy, if Tata's share of heart is large with me, I'm going to buy for sure a Tata next time, no question, right? But what's also great about share of heart is that that's what triggers my emotion to actually start sharing your messages with others and start talking positively about your brand. The last thing is share of influence, is that may be relevant to some of you, maybe not all of you. But I think when we look at that whole social media thing, I think the ability we have today to tap in, to really understand who are the influencers and engage them can be extremely powerful, right? So measuring, how many influencers are there in a given industry and what percentage of them are we actually able to communicate with or influence, if you will. I think that's an important component, and it probably is going to be an important skill set for digital marketers in now and in the coming years. That's me, very bad picture. Like I said, I had to put these slides together in about an hour, but I just want to give you my formula I created many years ago just to address this social media and return on marketing investment thing. So I've taken the good old AIDA, attention, interest, desire, action, and used the first three letters, attention, interest, desire, that's AID. Then I've added the old Italian currency called Lira, which stands for like, interaction, recommendation, and action. And you'll notice in the picture that the L is red. That's really because it's irrelevant. Likes is not a currency. Likes mean nothing. Like is only access. It gives you access. If somebody liked your page on Facebook or on LinkedIn or YouTube or wherever it is, all it does is gives you access to communicate, right? What really matters is IRA, especially action. And a great digital marketer is not going to start bragging about the number of likes she has at the local restaurant. She's going to brag about the number of actions the people she reached took as a result of her messaging. She'll talk about sales. She'll talk about how many leads she acquired and how qualified those leads were, and so on. So please do remember that. Don't become one of those jackasses who measure their success in the number of likes they have on any of the social media channels. It's completely irrelevant if you really want to be an efficient, or should I say, effective marketer. The other thing when it comes to return on marketing investment is also to be aware of this little formula called MWR. It stands for Most Wanted Response. and I'll have to do this really quickly, which is whenever you have an activity, the first thing you ask is, what do we want people to do? Important thing we want people to do, I should mention. And then, or it could be, and or, what do we want people to think? What do we want people to learn? And how do we want people to react? After reaction, it's also a very good idea to understand what's the next step we want them to take. Because as you probably know, incubation time today for somebody buying something from you is longer than it were just 1-2 years ago, right? Consumers have all these options to find alternatives to what you offer, so they take longer time to make decisions. What that means is you have to have a strategy, not just for engagement, but also for how do you actually nudge these people in a nice way until such time when they're good and ready to make a purchase decision. So I mentioned 3 other skills. Sorry about this, it's a little bit, yeah. And like I said, I will go through these in more details with some other content at the webinar on the 7th of March, but they are experimental, approach, study, and apply. So now we have a few minutes left. Let me just run you through a few that relates to the experimental part. First of all, I think we all need to understand that failure is a huge part of your success, and that is definitely true for digital marketing. What that means is that no one really knows what's going to work better or best. I don't. People ask me that all the time. Should I do this or that? I say, I have no idea. How would I know? And I don't. I mean, maybe I have some experience that might make my suggestion more likely to succeed than somebody without experience, but reality is we really don't know. For that reason, we have to build an objective-driven culture of experimentation. And in India, this is pretty much non-existent, but guess what? In Denmark, it's also pretty much non-existent. And that's a shame. Here's what I think we should be doing. Here's what I think you should be advocating in your business. First of all, we understand that constant experimentation helps innovation evolve. It helps improve on so many levels. So for that reason, what I think is we need to empower individuals to do their own experimentation. Not the boss people tell them what to experiment with necessarily, but the person you, within your area of expertise, you should be given 10 to 15% of budget and time to do your own experimentation and testing. So in other words, if you're working 170 hours a week, not a week, a month, yeah, then you should have around 20 hours per month that you can use exclusively to experiment and test. And keep in mind, some of your experimentation and testing is going to go the wrong way, but I'm pretty sure, because you're a smart person, some of this is actually going to be very, very interesting. It's going to create some better results, and maybe some results that will be groundbreaking for your business. So the budget part, of course, is also important, because if you don't have some budget to play with when you're experimenting or testing, you're pretty limited in what you can do, right? So that's what you should be advocating. And really, there's so many examples of how this experimentation can lead to unexpected results. One of them, if you followed the program, there's one part where I talk about the sheriff in a southern state in the United States who actually put his wanted criminals on Pinterest, and as a result, because he involved the local community, people actually started calling the sheriff's office whenever they saw one of these wanted criminals, and told the sheriff's office where the criminal is at this point in time, so that the sheriff's people could go and pick up the criminal. And that's a true story. And really, another great example of this is from Guadalajara, which is a state in Mexico in South America. And this bank wanted to tap into the young audience. And Facebook was very popular. This is some years ago. Facebook was very popular. So they thought maybe there's a way with our quick loans to actually engage young people through Facebook. So what they came up with is a simple process where if somebody needed a quick loan, all they had to do is to get 10 Facebook friends to endorse the loan. And that was very, very successful. And so critical people would say, well, they probably lost a lot of money on that group of people, but actually they didn't. The losses were less. And the reason, of course, is if, let's say his name was Pedro, didn't actually pay his installment, then the bank, of course, would write to his 10 friends and said, hola, Jose, have you seen Pedro? Because he's missing a payment. And as you can imagine, Jose would then get in touch with Pedro and said, hey, buddy, what's going on? Why haven't you made the payment? I endorsed you. I don't want my name to be associated with someone who doesn't pay, and so on. So that was a wonderful, wonderful experiment that turned out to work really well for the bank and is now running. And there's some more advanced experimentation that you can do, which has to do pretty much with any type of messaging, any type of creative, any type of copy, any type of process can be tested. As I'm sure you have learned if you are through the upGrad digital marketing program. Here's a very well-known example using eye tracking without EKG. And what you see here, look at the left first, you see the red color indicates where our eye focuses the most, right? So you see there's very much focus on the face of the baby, and we can't see the face, but I'm sure it was cute. On the other hand, if you look at the right-hand side, you see the baby has been, the position of the baby has been switched, so the baby is now looking at our headline, which is very important, right? And we see that the red color now is distributed in different places, not just by the side of the eye of the baby, but also up in the headline and further down in our copy, even all the way down to the right-hand lower corner, where there's a bit of copy explaining the diaper product that we are trying to sell here. Do you see how this could impact? Lots of people don't do this. In fact, I'd say the majority of digital marketers don't. And this is really crucial, super crucial, in order to improve your results. And when you improve results, as I said before, that's how you get a better degree. Now, in summary, before we go to the Q&A, I've just touched upon the two first, channel agnosticity and the return on marketing investment focused, and given you a few examples of being experimental. In the webinar, we'll expand more on this as well as approach, study, and apply. But I do want to mention one thing before we go to Q&A. In fact, two things. And the first thing is, although you are studying digital marketing, keep in mind that there's still many traditional marketing methods that outperform digital marketing. Do not blind yourself like so many have to think that digital is the only way. Even if you don't know print, if you don't know TV, if you don't know direct mail, if you don't know out of home, if you don't know promotion in store and so on. If you don't know these things, you got to study them, right? Because they still matter, and in an Indian context, they still matter. And keep in mind that in certain parts of India, life is completely different than your life. And if you want to reach and engage these folks, you probably have to do different things than you would if you were reaching people in places like Mumbai and Delhi and so on. I think that's very important. And the last thing I want to say is don't forget to join the webinar. The link is there. I'm not sure whether you can actually click on that link, but the slides will be shared after the fact, so then you'll have the link there. So I think with that, I want to thank you for listening, and I think we're ready for the Q&A.
Thanks for that lovely presentation, Michael. It was most engaging. So the first question that we have is from our student Webhelp. So he'd like to know, could you please explain the Lira and Romy model for Fortune 500 companies?
So what was the question again? I heard Fortune 500.
Yeah, sorry about that. So the question is, could you please explain Lira and Romy model for Fortune 500 companies? So sort of with an example of a Fortune 500 company.
Yeah, let's take Vodafone. I'm not sure if it's a Fortune 500, but it's definitely a very large company. It's very interesting. In some countries, for social media, Vodafone has been focusing on the same that everybody else sort of agreed was the right plan 7-8 years ago, which is just engage people, right? Don't be too pushy. But Vodafone in Egypt, for example, when it comes to 8 Lira, they didn't want to waste their time. And they wanted to use these channels where they could build a sizable audience to sell stuff. So if you take the leader model, in particular the leader part, if you look at Vodafone Egypt, they're not even beginning to think that it's all about engagement of people like most. They really focus on the interaction and the recommendation and the action, and in particular the action. So what I'm saying with that is, in Vodafone's case, they're just focusing on using social media for sales. I don't know if that answers the question, because I think it doesn't matter whether you're a Fortune 500 or a Fortune 9 million company. The principle is the same. Social media is not designed for all of the crap that people would like you to believe. Sure, you can have fun with it, but reality is you got to focus on that interaction and recommendation and action, and not the likes. And whether it's one type of company or the other, I think that is true. But I do want to add one thing, which I think is especially true for large organizations, which is, if you look at social media as a whole, it seems that it's much better suited for customer service. And I'm very happy. I've been saying that for many, many years, and people didn't really like that I said that. But I'm not against social media. I'm just trying to understand how can we best leverage that channel. But I'm very happy to see that lots and lots of brands are pretty much mostly leveraging social media for customer service, right?
Right.
The wrong model.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, the other question was about return on marketing investment. It doesn't matter if it's a Fortune 500 company or it's a smaller company or whatever. It may be a public company, a government company. Return on marketing investment really is about finding your key metrics and what they are. Sure, in a large corporation, it might be more difficult to calculate how much can we afford to pay to acquire a new customer. And if the selling cycle is much longer, so a client of mine, they sell sell paint for airplanes, right? The contract negotiation itself is 10 years. So that's a completely different ball game than if you were selling, I don't know what, pencil or whatever, right? But it's really about understanding what are your key metrics, calculate to have an accurate picture of what you can afford in terms of acquisition of a new customer, acquisition of a lead, or whatever it is. I hope that it somehow answered the question.
Thanks a lot, Michael. So the next question that we have is, India is basically known for a very price-conscious audience. So how would you suggest that we apply the MWR concept for this audience?
The most wanted response has nothing to do with price, first of all, but I agree with you. Indians are very price conscious. Let's just agree to that. But that doesn't understand Indian consumers or business buyers don't understand value. I mean, they do. It doesn't mean they understand prestige, for example, and so on. Most wanted response really is a focus model, right? So it doesn't matter what you communicate. What matters is that you're 100% aware of what you most want someone to do, let's say on a web page, right? Important thing you want me to do when I visit that page. Once you're aware of that, then it will become clear to you what to communicate and what not. If you look at landing pages, websites, whatever it is, you see all the time that there's just too much friction. What I mean by that, there are too many elements that the eye has to deal with. I'm not saying a good landing page is very simplistic, because that may not necessarily be true, but I'm saying a good landing page, a good web page, or whatever it is, a good e-commerce page is going to be very focused on what it wants me to do.
Right. Thanks a lot, Michael. So the next question that we have is that, so most social media and other media messages by brands are very constructed. So what construction techniques would you suggest to sort of induce a customer to sort of interact and respond more with the brand rather than just, passively liking it? So how would you suggest brands go about constructing their messages better to get more responsive reactions from the audience?
That's a very intelligent question. First of all, I don't know who asked that question. It's a very intelligent question. I don't think I have an answer for that, because I think that certain people are good at understanding this, but and might be able to give you an answer on the fly. But I'm not, because I would need a lot more information about what your situation is, whom the target audience is, why the target audience spend their time on a given, let's say on a Facebook page or whatever it is. So I do apologize, but I don't want to just give you an answer because I feel that I have to. If I feel that I can't give you an appropriate answer, so for that reason, I'm going to have to decline to answer.
Absolutely understandable, Michael. So the next question that we have is actually something that many of our students tend to ask us. So many of them come from a strictly sort of traditional marketing background with, say, close to a decade of experience in more traditional channels. So
Okay.
yeah, so if they want to start a career in digital marketing, which is often seen as a sort of a younger person's field for the more tech savvy, etc., how do you suggest they sort of go about it, starting a career in digital marketing?
Well, studying, excuse me, it's winter here. Sorry about that. Studying, obviously, and you've started that process, so that's great. But otherwise, it's just get your how do you say, your feet wet, get your hands in the dinner or whatever it's called. Just get started. Probably a good way to start is to create assets. An asset could be a website, it could be a blog, it could be a micro website, it could be a landing page, or something like that. That's definitely one way to really quickly learn what's going on in digital. And the second thing, of course, is to use digital yourself. I mean, establish yourself, make sure you have a good LinkedIn presence, that you're experimenting with YouTube, with Facebook, and so on, Twitter and Instagram and Pinterest, and there's so many, not to mention Snapchat, WhatsApp, Telegram, whatever they're called, right? You learn this by doing it, is what I find. And by the way, it's true that the perception is that digital is for young people, but I actually believe, I'm very young myself, as you can see, but I actually believe people who have a traditional marketing background are much better positioned to be successful in digital. And here's why. If you have a decade of experience, it's very likely that you stopped focusing on channels and what's fun and started focusing on what gets you results. I think if you have a decade of experience and if you've been doing relatively well, I'm pretty sure that you care a lot about customers and your audience and what they do and what makes them tick and so on. And those are areas that a lot of digital marketers, let's say the younger people who are 35 years or less, who pretty much their first job, they were just doing digital marketing. They never printed a brochure, they've never run a national television campaign or whatever it may be, right? So I think, lost my train of thought there, but yes, I think that is a huge advantage to have that experience. But to summarize, I also think you learn it by doing it. Yes, did I answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks, Michael. So the other question that we have is sort of based on what you were saying. So if you would say social media is more for customer service, which channels would you recommend to sort of drive sales and sort of get good quality leads, basically?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I was just in Kenya where I did my digital marketing certificate course for the third time or whatever, and there was a brand which is one of the largest retail brands in Kenya was en passant there, and it was a young guy, but he's part of the family. So obviously he has a very large interest in the business as a whole, not just in social media. And we talked about this specifically. And what he actually could, excuse me, what he could confirm is that he has several thousands of, let's say, customer service messages on the Facebook account on a monthly basis, right? But he also saw that when he and his team answered the questions in a polite and timely fashion, they actually generated sales through that. So that's one answer to the question, is that if you give good service, you give people a good experience by being accessible so they can ask you questions about whatever, or they can criticize you, whatever they want to do, that in turn will generate sales. Because here's the thing, you know how a lot of brands in India, they like don't ever respond? I've tried it myself. I wanted to complain about something. It's like if I wanted to buy something, people would call me back in like 10 seconds, right? If I wanted to complain about something or had a problem, it could take days, right? So what I think is happening is that if your brand is able to give me good service in whatever channel in a timely fashion, and by timely I mean quick, right? Today the average response expectation on a global scale is something like 3.5 minutes. What that means is if I post a complaint in Facebook, for example, I expect the brand to get back to me within 3.5 minutes. Now, it's very difficult if you're Airtel or somebody like that, because they probably have thousands and thousands every single week who communicate through these social media channels. But so that's one thing. And the other thing I want to mention is test it. Now, when I say social media, keep in mind what I'm talking about is building of a community. Maybe I should have explained that before. So let's define it like that. Social media could be building a community, right? And 6-7 years ago, Facebook and others came along and we were able to build community. Unfortunately, Facebook and others introduced algorithms that meant although I had an audience of 100,000, I didn't actually reach 100,000 people when I posted my message. And I don't today. It's probably 3 or 4%, right? In other words, if I have 100,000 people following a page, maybe only 3 to 4% of them will see my message when I post something. But all of these sort of community platforms have now shifted, all of them, to become advertising platforms. So that's the answer to the question. So where do we find channels that will help us get sales? Well, that is really looking for advertising channels. Facebook is a relatively good advertising channel. It's not too expensive in India and other places. In my part of the world, in Scandinavia, it's very expensive to use Facebook. Well, that's relative because it depends on what you're selling. So yes, that's what it's about. Just do some advertising tests on Facebook and see how it performs. Do it on LinkedIn. I can say one of my companies currently running activities in LinkedIn for some specific emerging markets, and we're looking at acquiring leads at 18 euro cent. That is like super cheap, right? And we wouldn't have thought that LinkedIn would be able to do that for us. But like I said, check all those channels, run tests, start maybe with Facebook because you have a lot of audience on Facebook, Indian audience on Facebook, right? And by the way, when you do keep in mind that if you're able to communicate, let's say in Hindi or, I'm sorry, I can't remember the Kannada, whatever they're called, the different languages. So in other words, if you're communicating in the mother tongue of your audience, your ads are going to be much more successful than if you did in, let's say, Hindi, which is the national language, or English, another national language. I hope I answered your question.
Thanks a lot for that, Michael. So I think we've run out of time, guys. I'm so sorry. So I think that would need to bring us to an end of the session. Thanks, Michael, for joining us from Denmark. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the session. I certainly did, listening to Michael's presentation. It was most engaging and enjoyable. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. Have a good day. Have a good weekend.
You too.